Speaker, I want to start picking up from a comment from Dr. Paul Hutchison about the actions that police are apparently taking tonight, going around to stores and advising them what the outcome of this debate will be. I have to say I'm slightly offended by the assumption that my rhetoric in advocating against the interim prohibition that I sat on the Select Committee that considered this bill, sir, and I was very pleased with the outcome from the Select Committee process, and I have to say that this bill that we are considering tonight leaves me with very mixed feelings. On the one hand, one of the issues that was raised in the Select Committee was the matter of animal testing. And members will be very familiar with the Green Party minority view in the Select Committee report, which sets out the arguments against using evidence for animal testing, sets out what the alternatives to that are. And we went on in the committee stage, Mr. Speaker, to advance a supplementary order paper in Mojo Mather's name, and unfortunately it didn't gather the necessary majority at that time. And I'm very pleased that apparently I think all members of the House are now convinced by the arguments for the change that Mojo Mather's proposed at that time. On the other aspect of the bill, however, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure all members of this House are aware that we oppose, in fact, the effective repeal of the interim regime and replacement of that interim regime by a prohibition regime until the Act takes full effect. So our party disagrees with, I think, probably all other members in the House on this point. I just want to take this opportunity in the second and third readings in this debate, sir, to advance our reasons for that and to respectfully disagree with other members. We believe that interim regime established by the Act, while very far from perfect, Mr. Speaker, was the best way of approaching the period between the completely unregulated regime that had previously applied and the bill and the Act taking full effect. We thought it was the best way to go about that. We think that the prohibition regime that's being substituted for that regime now is the wrong approach and being taken for the wrong reasons. Paul Hutchison also spoke about some of the opposition to the Act and his electorate being based on wrong information or misleading information, and I think that's a bit of a common theme. I've been travelling around the country quite a lot, and people have been saying things to me like, we don't understand why Parliament chose to legalise synthetic cannabis. Well, okay, there's two problems with that idea. The first is these substances were many. They were not a single substance. And the substances that are still legally on the shelf tonight, in fact, are still many. They are different products. They are made up from different compounds. They have different effects. Some of them have very low risk. Some of them may have higher risk. It is a mistake, Mr. Speaker, to assume that they are all the same thing or that they all pose the same level of risk. Yet that is the assumption that members of the public have been led to believe. The second point, of course, is that Parliament did not legalise the availability of these substances. They were legally available. In fact, Parliament chose to impose in the interim regime a very substantial regulatory regime, and an even more substantial regulatory regime would take effect when the Act comes to be in place completely. The third thing that I've heard from members of the public, justifiably concerned about what's occurring out there in the community, is the idea that the harm caused prior to the Act is assumed to still be being caused. So, for example, there was a National Day of Action that community organisations held some little while ago. The Television New Zealand piece that preceded that was largely comprised of an interview with someone whose son, tragically, had suffered some very major psychological effects of consuming a psychoactive substance. That consumption, Mr. Speaker, had occurred some 3 years prior, and that substance had not been on the shelves for some considerable period. In all of the debate that I've seen about substantial harm still being caused, actually the debate has related to substances that are no longer available. Fourthly, Mr. Speaker, there is, I think, a widespread belief that problems have got worse. And in fact, I think as some speakers in the debates on this bill so far have probably alluded to, that is not the case. The number of outlets has drastically reduced. The number of products on the shelves has substantially reduced. Sales have reduced and harm has reduced. And Mr. Speaker, I want to quote from the Ministry of Health. So Nicola Keane, who's a producer for the Nation program, asked the Ministry of Health, I guess 2 weeks ago now, so just prior to the announcement of this approach, what's the trend, if any, for people presenting at A&E for problems with psychoactive substances since the law was introduced? The Ministry's answer was, while it is early days, the authority has received anecdotal reports demonstrating the number of severe presentations to emergency departments has reduced since the Act came in. The authority monitors approved products received from the Centre for Adverse Reactions Monitoring and calls from the public to the National Poison Centre on a regular basis. These reports also show a reduction in the number of severe issues being reported. Where severe adverse reactions are reported, the authority has the power to act and has already removed products from the market where reports to CALM identified they pose more than a low risk of harm. There you are, Mr. Speaker. The Act, as we passed it, was working. The interim regime was reducing harm. And the power existed, Mr. Speaker, for any products that were identified as causing harm to be reduced from the shelves. And the Ministry, the authority, was taking that step, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, it was a bit of a puzzle when I heard Mr. Dunn on the television saying that this new regime, an interim prohibition on all of these substances, was being introduced, but that it was not possible to identify any particular substance with which reports of adverse reactions were associated. Mr. Speaker, that is unbelievable nonsense. The regime absolutely existed to be able to identify reports of harm with a particular substance. The Ministry, the authority, had already been using that fact to suspend products, to take them off the shelves. Mr. Speaker, the fact is that the community concerns were being driven by increased visibility. That is precisely what we wanted to happen. That for every shop still selling these products, at least 20 had been closed down. So while usage had been reduced, it was being concentrated and being made more visible around the surviving outlets. Visibility, access to treatment is precisely what we want. I absolutely understand those community concerns, Mr. Speaker, but the way that government should have responded to those concerns was with better quality information for communities, better quality information for local bodies, and better access to information about treatment and better resourcing for treatment services. Communities deserved leadership. And instead, what we have is a knee-jerk response, while popular, is based not on fact, but on populism. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mike Sabin.
Thank you, sir.